The sun hung low over the ridge that afternoon, painting the dusty trail in shades of amber and gold, when Thomas Wade first saw the figure hanging from the old cottonwood tree. He had been riding for 3 days straight, coming back from selling cattle in Dodge City, and his bones ached with the kind of tired that settles deep into a man past 50. The horse beneath him sensed his weariness and had slowed to an easy walk when they crested the hill, and there in the clearing stood that ancient tree with its gnarled branches reaching toward heaven. But it was what hung from those branches that made Thomas pull hard on the reins. A young woman no more than 25 by his guess was suspended there, her arms stretched wide and bound with rope, her feet barely touching the ground. Her clothes were torn and covered in dirt and blood, and her dark hair fell across her face in tangled strands. Thomas sat frozen for a moment, his heart pounding against his ribs like a drum. He had seen many things in his years on the frontier, but this sight struck him with a particular horror. The woman's head lifted slowly, as if the effort cost her everything, and through the curtain of her hair he could see her eyes. They were not filled with the terror he expected, but with something else entirely, a deep exhaustion, a resignation that seemed older than her years. "Please," she said, and her voice was barely a whisper carried on the evening breeze. "Just make it quick." Thomas dismounted slowly, his knees protesting as his boots hit the ground. He was a tall man, made taller by the worn Stetson he'd owned for 20 years, and his face was weathered like old leather from a lifetime under the prairie sun. "Ma'am," he said softly, approaching with his hands, visible and empty, "I'm not here to hurt you." The woman's eyes followed him with a wariness that reminded him of a cornered animal. "They said someone would come," she whispered. "They said the rancher would finish what they started." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. He had heard stories in town, whispers over whiskey, about a gang that had been terrorizing the smaller homesteads. They called themselves the Devil's Brotherhood, and their leader was a man named Silas Cord, who fancied himself judge and jury over these parts. "I don't know what you've been told," Thomas said, reaching for his knife, "but I'm going to cut you down now." He worked carefully, sawing through the rough hemp that bound her wrists. The rope was thick and new, and he wondered, grimly, how long she had been hanging there. When the last strand parted, the woman collapsed forward, and Thomas caught her before she could hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, like a bird with hollow bones, and he could feel her, trembling against him. "Easy now," he murmured. "I've got you." He carried her to a patch of grass near his horse and laid her down gently. From his saddlebag he retrieved a canteen and a clean shirt he'd packed that morning. The woman's eyes never left his face as he dampened the shirt and began to carefully clean the dirt and blood from her cheeks. "What's your name?" he asked, though he kept his voice low and gentle. She hesitated, as if the question itself was a trap. "Sarah," she finally said. "Sarah Mitchell." "Well, Miss Sarah, I'm Thomas Wade, and I promise you're safe now." A bitter laugh escaped her cracked lips. "Safe," she repeated, as if the word was foreign. "There's no such thing as safe, not anymore." Thomas sat back on his heels, studying her face in the fading light. "Those men who did this to you, where are they now?" Sarah closed her eyes. "Gone to town, probably celebrating at the saloon by now." "And your family?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Thomas felt a familiar ache in his chest, the same one he'd carried for 15 years, since his own wife Margaret had passed from fever. "I had a homestead," Sarah said finally. "Just a small place with a garden and some chickens. My husband and I were trying to make a go of it." She paused, and Thomas saw her throat work as she swallowed. "James was a good man, a gentleman, and when Silas Cord came demanding protection money, James stood up to him." Thomas already knew how this story ended, but he let her tell it. "They shot him right there in our yard, and when I tried to run, they caught me and dragged me here. And Silas said I was an example, and that you, the big rancher who owned all this land, you'd find me and finish the job." Thomas felt anger rise in his gut, hot and sharp. Had built his ranch over 30 years, working from dawn until dark, breaking his back and his spirit more times than he could count. But never had he harmed an innocent soul. "Miss Sarah," he said, and his voice carried the weight of conviction. "I don't know what lies those men told you, but I would never harm someone in need." She opened her eyes, then really looking at him for the first time. Then why did they say you would? Thomas sighed and removed his hat, running a hand through his gray hair. Because men like Silas Cord need villains to justify their cruelty, and a big rancher makes for an easy target in their stories. He stood slowly and extended his hand to her. Can you ride? Sarah nodded, though her movements were uncertain. Thomas helped her onto his horse and then swung up behind her, keeping one arm around her waist to steady her. Where are we going? She asked. My ranch. Thomas said, It's about an hour's ride from here, and my housekeeper, Clara, will get you cleaned up and bed. As they rode through the gathering dusk, Thomas found himself thinking about the choices that had brought him to this moment. He had always tried to be a fair man, paying his ranch hands, honest wages, and treating his neighbors with respect, but he knew that success bred resentment and that some men in town viewed his prosperity with suspicious eyes. By the time they reached the ranch house, the stars were beginning to emerge like pinpricks in a dark curtain. Clara met them at the door, her round face creased with concern when she saw Sarah's condition. Lord have mercy, Clara breathed. Bring her inside, mister. Wade. Over the next few days, Sarah slowly regained her strength. Clara fussed over her like a mother hen preparing hearty meals and finding clean clothes that had once belonged to Margaret. Thomas kept his distance, not wanting to overwhelm the young woman, but he found himself checking on her progress each evening. On the third night, Sarah joined him on the porch where he sat watching the sunset. Thank you, she said, sitting in the chair beside him. For everything. Thomas nodded. You don't need to thank me, Miss Sarah. Any decent person would have done the same. But you did it, she said, when you could have just ridden past. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crickets sing their evening chorus. What will you do now? Thomas asked finally. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. I don't know, and I have nothing, no home, no family, nowhere to go. Thomas considered this. You could stay here, he said. Clara's been saying for years that she needs help with the house and the garden. Sarah turned to look at him, surprise evident in her eyes. You'd do that for me? It's not charity, Thomas said gruffly. It's honest work for honest pay. But they both knew it was more than that. Over the weeks that followed, Sarah became part of the rhythm of the ranch. She helped Clara with the cooking and cleaning, and she proved to have a natural way with the horses that impressed even Thomas's most experienced hands. Thomas watched her slowly come back to life like a flower after a long drought. Her laughter began to return, first tentative and then more freely, and the haunted look in her eyes gradually faded. One evening, about a month after he'd found her, Thomas came in from the fields to find Sarah and Clara in the kitchen, preserving tomatoes from the garden. The scene was so domestic, so peaceful, that it struck him with unexpected force. This was what a home should feel like. Not the empty silence that had filled these rooms since Margaret's death, but the warm buzz of voices and the comfort of shared purpose. Mr. Wade, Sarah said, looking up from her work. There's something I need to tell you. Thomas poured himself coffee and sat at the table. What's on your mind? Sarah exchanged a glance with Clara before continuing. I was in town yesterday helping Clara with the shopping, and I heard people talking. She paused, clearly struggling with how to continue. Silas Cord has been spreading more lies, saying that you're the one who killed James and that you're keeping me prisoner here. Thomas felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice calm. Do you believe that, Sarah? Of course not, she said quickly. But Mr. Wade, the town is starting to believe him, and some people are saying things. Clara placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. She's right, Tom, and there's more. Silas has been gathering men talking about justice and about how the big ranchers have too much power. Thomas stood and walked to the window. He could see his land stretching out in every direction, the result of decades of hard work and sacrifice. But he also understood that to some people, all they saw was one man with too much when others had too little. What would you have me do? He asked. Talk to them. Sarah said, tell them the truth. Thomas shook his head. The truth doesn't matter to men like Silas. They've already decided what they want to believe. But Sarah stood and came to his side. Then, do it for the people who haven't decided yet. And do it for the ones who want to believe in goodness but need to see it standing up for itself. Her words stirred something in Thomas. He had spent so many years keeping his head down and minding his own business that he'd forgotten what it meant to stand for something beyond his own land. The next day, Thomas rode into town. The main street was busy with the usual commerce farmers selling produce at the market and cowboys lingering outside the saloon. But conversations stopped as Thomas passed, and eyes followed him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. He found Silas Cord exactly where he expected, at a table in the saloon, sir.